The Munificent-class star frigate is the most slept-on ship in the Separatist fleet. And you already know that. You've known it since you watched Clone Wars and noticed these things everywhere. Blocking Christophsis, swarming Coruscant, showing up in basically every fleet engagement where the CIS needed actual firepower. 825 meters of forward-mounted heavy turbolasers and ion cannons. Tens of thousands produced. The ship functioned as a pocket cruiser because it punched so far above its weight class that calling it a frigate felt like an insult. So here's my question. Where did they all go? Not destroyed. Not all of them. We're talking about the single most numerous capital ship class the Confederacy ever fielded. Tens of thousands. More Munificents came off production lines than any other CIS warship during 3 years of continuous galactic war. They were at Christophsis in 22 BBY, at the Rishi Moon that same year, at Bothawui, at Devaron. Thousands of them showed up to assault Coruscant itself in 19 BBY, the most heavily defended world in the galaxy. And then, gone. Not destroyed in the final battle, gone. Not, we saw them explode, gone. Just absent. The Clone Wars ends, the Empire rises, and the Munificent-class star frigate vanishes from Star Wars canon like it never existed. No Imperial-era sightings, no Rebels appearances, no narrative appearances in any story set after 19 BBY. And that's weird, because other Separatist ships survived. The Lucrehulk-class battleship shows up in post-Clone Wars material. The Providence-class dreadnought gets Imperial-era documentation. Battle droids escape the shutdown signal through technical malfunction or isolation or deliberate modification. Canon explicitly establishes that military hardware ended up in criminal hands during the chaos after the war. But the Munificent? The ship that was everywhere? The one the banking clan produced in quantities that made Republic strategists nervous? Silence. I don't think this is an accident. Or rather, I don't think you should accept storytelling oversight as an answer when something this obvious goes unexplained. So we're going to do what Star Wars canon refuses to do. We're going to investigate what happened to tens of thousands of warships that didn't just evaporate into the vacuum of space. And we're going to talk about pirates. Let's establish something first, because the last time anyone covered this ship, it turned into a spec sheet that nobody asked for. You don't need me to tell you about reactor configurations or shield frequencies. What you need is context for why this disappearance matters, and that means understanding what the Munificent actually represented in the Clone Wars. The Munificent wasn't designed as a warship, not originally. Chairman San Hill of the Intergalactic Banking Clan commissioned Hirschkessel Drive Incorporated and Gwori Revolutionary Industries to build armed transports, vessels capable of protecting financial assets across unstable systems while maintaining communication networks for banking clan operations. These were supposed to be glorified security craft, expensive couriers with guns. Then the Clone Wars happened, and suddenly the banking clan found itself committed to Count Dooku's Confederacy of Independent Systems with a fleet of security craft that happened to mount 2 heavy turbolaser cannons capable of melting an ice moon 1,000 kilometers in diameter. Or, if you prefer a more practical benchmark, breaching the shields of a Grade 3 battle station. That's siege weapon firepower, on a frigate hull. The Republic noticed. Their tactical analysts looked at the Munificent's forward armament, those 2 heavy turbolasers plus 2 heavy ion cannons optimized for capital ship engagement, and recognized the threat immediately. Standard frigate response tactics would get Republic captains killed. These vessels carried firepower that belonged on dedicated siege platforms, mounted on a hull fast enough and numerous enough to show up everywhere. And those ion cannons deserve special attention. Most capital ships carry weapons designed to destroy targets. The Munificent's ion battery was designed to disable them, strip shields, kill power systems, leave a vessel drifting dead while accompanying ships moved in for the kill, or while boarding parties crossed the void between hulls. The combination made the Munificent uniquely dangerous in fleet actions, and uniquely valuable for anyone interested in taking prizes rather than making wreckage. Remember that. It matters later. Secondary armament included 13 twin light turbolaser cannons on each broadside, 20 turret-mounted light turbolasers distributed across port and starboard positions, 12 medium flak cannons for anti-starfighter defense, and 38 point defense laser cannons, calibrated for intercepting incoming missiles and small craft. The frigate also carried up to 4 squadrons of Vulture-class droid starfighters, providing organic fighter support without requiring dedicated carrier vessels. This wasn't a ship designed to operate alone. This was a ship designed to operate in coordinated squadrons, massing fire from multiple hulls, accepting individual losses in exchange for overwhelming concentrated firepower. Separatist doctrine built the Munificent to be part of a swarm. But it wasn't the armament that made the Munificent terrifying to Republic logistics officers. It was the price tag, and the production numbers that price tag enabled. The Separatist military doctrine operated on a simple principle. The Confederacy couldn't match the Republic's Jedi commanders, or the combat effectiveness of clone troopers on an individual basis. Jedi could coordinate fleets through the Force. Clone crews trained together from decanting, functioning as synchronized units in ways that organic crews from dozens of different Separatist worlds never could. Ship for ship, crew for crew, the Republic had advantages the Confederacy couldn't replicate. So they compensated with numbers. Overwhelming, expendable, replaceable numbers. The Munificent-class embodied this philosophy so perfectly that the banking clan kept production lines running continuously from 22 BBY until the war's end in 19 BBY. Hirsch Kessel Drive and Gwori Revolutionary Industries maintained output across multiple shipyard facilities, stamping out frigates faster than Republic forces could destroy them. Tens of thousands. That's not an exaggeration for dramatic effect. That's the documented scale. Canon sources consistently describe production in the tens of thousands. More Munificent-class frigates rolled out of Separatist shipyards than any other capital ship in Confederacy service. The exact total produced remains unspecified in available records, but the sheer ubiquity of Munificents in documented fleet actions demonstrates that production consistently outpaced combat losses throughout a 3-year galactic war. Think about what that means logistically. 3 years of continuous production. Tens of thousands of 800-meter warships. The raw materials alone, the durasteel, the components, the weapons systems, the hyperdrive units, represent industrial output on a scale that dwarfs most planetary economies. The banking clan didn't just fund a navy, they funded an entire parallel military-industrial complex that existed specifically to keep Munificent production running. And every one of those ships was cheap enough that losing individual vessels didn't cripple fleet operations. Numerous enough that replacements arrived faster than the Republic could destroy them. Powerful enough that Republic commanders couldn't just ignore Munificent formations without risking serious damage to their own forces. Here's the operational detail that matters for what comes later. A Munificent required only 200 crew members. 200. The ship's internal systems were designed for extensive droid operation. B-1 battle droids handled routine maintenance, damage control, secondary weapon stations, all the tasks that would require hundreds of additional organic personnel on a Republic vessel. The Venator-class Star Destroyer, the Republic's workhorse capital ship, required over 7,000 crew. 7,000 trained naval personnel for every deployment. The Munificent needed 200 organics and a complement of droids. The hollow hull structure that gave the Munificent its distinctive skeletal appearance also provided capacity for transporting 150,000 battle droids in stasis chambers. One ship could deliver entire ground armies to contested worlds without requiring separate transport vessels. This integration of combat capability and logistical capacity made the Munificent exceptionally cost-effective compared to Republic alternatives. The Republic needed separate warships and dedicated troop transports and larger crew complements on every vessel. The Separatists needed Munificents and droids. Which means, when we talk about what happened after the Clone Wars, we're not just asking about ships. We're asking about ships that came pre-packaged with their own crews. Ships designed from the ground up to operate with minimal organic oversight. Ships that any competent pirate crew would kill to get their hands on. Let me walk you through the documented combat record, because this establishes just how ubiquitous these frigates were before they disappeared. This isn't comprehensive. The Clone Wars generated too many engagements for any list to capture, but these are the documented actions that show how the Separatists used their pocket cruisers. 22 BBY. Early in the war, the Separatists establish a blockade at Christophsis using 30 major warships. Munificent-class frigates form the backbone of this formation, not supporting elements, but the primary combat capability, while larger vessels served command and logistical functions. The Republic eventually broke through, but the engagement established the tactical pattern that would characterize munificent deployment throughout the war. Mass the frigates, use them as your main striking force, accept losses in exchange for overwhelming firepower. Same year, General Grievous commands 9 Munificent-class frigates alongside 2 Lucrehulk battleships during operations against the Rishi Moon listening post. Look at that ratio, 9 frigates to 2 battleships. The Lucrehulks were the famous ships, the ones everyone remembers from the Trade Federation blockade of Naboo. But in actual Separatist fleet doctrine, they were command vessels. The Munificents were the teeth. Also, 22 BBY. 6 Munificents engaged 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers under Jedi General Anakin Skywalker's command at the Battle of Bothawui. On paper, 6 frigates with their combined firepower should have been able to overwhelm 3 Star Destroyers through concentrated volleys. They didn't. Skywalker exploited their coordination weaknesses and the frigate's individual defensive vulnerabilities. But the engagement demonstrated something important about Separatist doctrine. They were willing to throw munificent squadrons at superior individual opponents. They were willing to accept losses. They had enough ships that losses were acceptable. That's terrifying if you're a Republic commander. You destroy 1 Munificent, and 2 more arrive to replace it. You win a battle, and the next engagement features even more frigates because production never stopped. 21 BBY. Skywalker's forces engage a 4-ship Munificent squadron at the Battle of Devaron. 3 frigates destroyed, 1 captured intact. Republic intelligence finally gets detailed information about the frigate's systems and capabilities. But the larger pattern is what matters. Republic forces systematically overwhelming individual Separatist frigates through concentrated attacks, and the Separatists simply replacing their losses with fresh production. Kill 3 Munificents, capture 1, and the CIS shipyards have already built 4 more. And here's something worth noting about that captured vessel. The Republic didn't keep it in service. They studied it, analyzed its systems, then presumably scrapped it or stored it somewhere nobody ever mentioned again. Even when the Republic had Separatist hardware in their hands, they didn't integrate it into their own fleets. The ships were too different, too droid-dependent, too alien to Republic naval doctrine. This matters because it tells us something about how the Empire probably handled captured Separatist vessels later. They weren't going to crew them with Imperial personnel. They weren't going to maintain 2 completely different fleet architectures. They were going to scrap them, or try to. 19 BBY, the Battle of Coruscant. Thousands of Munificent-class frigates, not hundreds, thousands. The Separatist Navy committed sufficient forces to launch a direct assault on the most heavily defended world in the entire galaxy, the Republic capital, the seat of the Senate, the heart of everything they were fighting against. And the Munificent was the ship class that made those numbers possible. 3 years of continuous production culminated in a fleet action that deployed more capital ships than any previous engagement in the Clone Wars. The chaos of that battle defies easy description. Hundreds of ships engaged in close quarters over Coruscant's orbital space. Vulture droids swarming in clouds thick enough to blot out stars. Venators and Munificents trading broadsides at ranges where gunners could see the hull plates buckling on enemy vessels. The Republic won, barely, but the victory came at enormous cost to both sides. We don't have exact casualty figures for Munificent losses at Coruscant. The battle was too chaotic, too massive, too fast-moving for comprehensive documentation. But we know the Separatists didn't lose all of them, because Munificent-class vessels appear in documented fleet actions during the Siege of Mandalore, one of the final major Separatist operations before Order 66 and the droid deactivation signal. The Siege of Mandalore. The last confirmed combat deployment of the Munificent-class star frigate, in any canon source, ever. The Clone Wars ended on Mustafar in 19 BBY. Darth Vader executed the Separatist Council on Emperor Palpatine's orders. The newly declared Galactic Empire transmitted a shutdown signal that deactivated battle droid armies across the galaxy, freezing droid crews in whatever tasks they were performing when the transmission reached their systems. And then the Empire began the process of deciding what to do with 3 years' worth of Separatist military hardware. Here's what canon tells us about that process. Not much. We know the Empire reintegrated former Separatist worlds into its governmental structure. We know former Separatist corporate interests, the Trade Federation, the Banking Clan, the Techno Union, were absorbed or dismantled or brought under Imperial control. We know some Separatist military assets were seized. We know some were scrapped. What we don't have is documentation of what specifically happened to the Separatist fleet. The disposition of captured or abandoned Separatist vessels receives substantially less attention in available records than the fate of Republic ships that transitioned into Imperial service. The Venator class became the backbone of the early Imperial Navy before the Star Destroyer succeeded it. The Acclamator class assault ships continued operating under Imperial colors. Republic assets got tracking. Republic assets got documentation. Separatist assets? A gap in the records. And the Munificent-class star frigate, produced in greater numbers than any other Separatist capital ship, present at virtually every major naval engagement of the war, received no confirmed on-screen sightings after 19 BBY. Not one. In any story. The Clone Wars animated series features Munificents through its final season. Every time the CIS deploys a fleet, there they are. The Siege of Mandalore arc includes them. The show ends, the Empire rises, and these ships, which the show established as the standard Separatist capital ship, vanish from the narrative. Star Wars Rebels is set approximately 14 years after the Clone Wars. It explores the early Imperial-era extensively. Characters encounter former Separatist equipment. They find battle droids that escaped the shutdown signal. They discover installations that remained operational in remote systems. The show explicitly addresses the Clone Wars legacy through characters like Captain Rex and through storylines involving Separatist holdouts. No Munificents. Not a single appearance. Not a single reference. And here's the part that makes this absence suspicious rather than just an oversight. Other Separatist ship classes do appear in Imperial-era canon. The Lucreholt-class battleship, that massive ring-shaped vessel that defined Trade Federation naval power before and during the Clone Wars, receives documentation in post-Clone Wars material. The Providence-class dreadnought, which served as the Separatist Navy's dedicated command ship, gets similar treatment. Sources document these vessels being captured, encountered, or referenced in Imperial contexts. Canon also documents examples of battle droids that escaped the deactivation signal. Some through technical malfunction. Their receivers didn't pick up the shutdown transmission or processed it incorrectly. Some through isolation. They were in remote systems the signal didn't reach, or they were powered down when the transmission came and never received the order. Some through deliberate modification. Owners who wanted to preserve their droid assets removed the shutdown protocols before the signal arrived. Some droids were recovered years later and restored to functionality by individuals or organizations that reprogrammed them for new purposes. Canon establishes this happened. Canon shows us characters interacting with battle droids that served new masters in the Imperial era. And canon establishes instances of military hardware transitioning into criminal circulation. Abandoned ships recovered from battlefields. Corrupt officials selling surplus equipment. Vessels captured from military convoys. The infrastructure for military surplus entering the black market existed and operated during the chaos of the post-war period. So we have confirmed survival of other Separatist ship classes, confirmed survival and reprogramming of battle droids, confirmed pathways for military hardware reaching criminal hands. And somehow, despite all three of these things being documented, not a single Munificent-class frigate, the most numerous capital ship in the Separatist Navy, found its way into any post-war story. No appearances, no references, no acknowledgement that these ships existed. Let's be clear about something. I'm not here to complain about the Clone Wars show's Republic bias. We all noticed it. We all saw that CIS ships mostly existed as targets for Jedi heroes, unless they were the Malevolence, getting its own multi-episode arc. That's not a grievance worth dwelling on. It's just how the show worked. The Republic was the protagonist faction. Separatist assets were obstacles to overcome. But the post-war silence is different. The post-war silence is a mystery. Because the three facts I just listed, other ships survived, droids got reprogrammed, hardware reached criminals, create a logical framework that should include the Munificent. The silence isn't consistent with what we know about the post-war period. It's not an oversight in the sense of writers forgot these ships existed. It's more like a deliberate exclusion, a choice not to address what happened to tens of thousands of warships. And I think I know why. Here's what I think happened. Not what the canon says, because the canon says nothing. Here's the story that makes sense when you apply everything we know about the post-Clone Wars galaxy to the specific characteristics of the Munificent-class star frigate. The Munificent required 200 crew. That's nothing. That's a skeleton crew by capital ship standards. It's a crew size that makes the vessel operationally viable for any moderately organized group with access to the ship. You don't need the resources of a government to crew a Munificent. You need a couple hundred beings and the technical knowledge to operate naval systems. And the Munificent was designed for droid operation. So when the shutdown signal went out in 19 BBY and battle droid armies froze across the galaxy, it didn't take much to restore a Munificent to operational status. You didn't need 7,000 trained naval personnel like a Venator would require. You needed enough technical expertise to override the shutdown protocols on a few hundred B1s, or to acquire droids that had already escaped the signal through isolation or malfunction. And suddenly, you had a fully crewed warship. The Empire wasn't going to do this. The Empire wanted centralized control, human-preferring crew compositions, standardized vessel classes. Palpatine was building a military designed to enforce loyalty and suppress dissent. The last thing he needed was thousands of former Separatist frigates crewed by droids he couldn't order around, operating outside the Imperial command structure. The Empire's solution was almost certainly systematic. Find the Munificents, disable or destroy them, scrap them for materials, make sure they couldn't threaten Imperial consolidation. And in the core worlds and the well-patrolled mid-rim, that probably worked. Imperial forces could locate and eliminate Separatist naval assets in systems where Imperial authority was established. But the Outer Rim? The Outer Rim was chaos. Picture the galaxy in 20 BBY. The Clone Wars just ended. The Republic became the Empire overnight, and suddenly every system has to figure out what that means for them. The core worlds fall in line because the core worlds were always loyal, and the transition feels orderly. The mid-rim adjusts because Imperial forces are present in sufficient numbers to encourage compliance. The Outer Rim? The Outer Rim was Separatist territory. Systems that spent years under CIS control. Worlds that fought against the Republic and now are supposed to accept that the Republic won, and also became something called the Galactic Empire. And also, the Jedi were traitors all along. Governments collapsed. Trade routes disrupted by 3 years of war sat unstable and unpatrolled. The infrastructure that maintained order during the Clone Wars, the battle droids, the Separatist military presence, was gone, deactivated, and the Empire hadn't yet built the replacement infrastructure to fill the gap. For a few years, maybe longer, the Outer Rim existed in a state of lawlessness that the Empire tolerated because the Empire had bigger priorities. Consolidating the core, hunting Jedi survivors, building the military apparatus that would eventually become the Star Destroyer fleets and the Stormtrooper legions. And scattered across 1,000 systems in that lawless outer rim were Munificent-class frigates. Some abandoned when their crews received the shutdown signal and the organic commanders surrendered or fled. Some with damaged communication arrays that never picked up the deactivation transmission. Some in dry dock for repairs, powered down and waiting. Some in the hands of officers who saw the writing on the wall and deliberately powered down their droids before the signal came, because they knew a warship was worth more than surrender. The ships existed. The droids existed. The pathways for military hardware reaching criminal hands existed. What happened next is a matter of logic. A munificent in pirate hands makes too much sense not to have happened. Start with the crew requirement. 200 organic personnel is the documented minimum for operation, but the ship was designed for droid automation. A small group of criminals, a dozen, maybe 24 with technical expertise, could operate a munificent effectively if they had access to reprogrammed battle droids. Override the shutdown protocols, give the droids new command parameters, and suddenly you have a crew that doesn't require payment, doesn't require shore leave, doesn't question orders, doesn't have families to worry about. The weapons were already optimized for the pirate mission. Those 2 heavy ion cannons weren't designed to destroy targets. They were designed to disable them, strip shields, kill engines and power systems, leave a vessel drifting helpless while you sent boarding parties across. For a pirate operation, that's perfect. You don't destroy your prize, you disable it, board it, take what you want, leave the crew alive to spread word of your fleet's power. The heavy turbolasers provided deterrence. Any ship smaller than a dedicated warship would think twice about engaging a munificent. Imperial patrol craft, corporate security vessels, rival pirate operations. None of them carried firepower that could reliably threaten an 800-meter frigate with siege weapons mounted on its bow. And the cargo capacity in those hollow hulls meant storage for everything a pirate operation needed. Stolen goods, spare parts, backup droids. A munificent could hold 150,000 battle droids in stasis. A pirate crew wouldn't need that many, but the space was there for whatever cargo they wanted to move. So let me give you the scene that official canon refuses to provide. It's 18 BBY, maybe 17. The Empire is a year or two old, still establishing authority in systems that spent decades as Separatist territory. An Outer Rim convoy, maybe corporate freighters hauling raw materials from mining operations, maybe even a small Imperial patrol returning from a sweep of uninhabited systems, drops out of hyperspace into a system that should be empty. It's not empty. 3 ships waiting at the edge of the system's mass shadow, 825 meters each, skeletal hulls catching light from a distant star, that distinctive munificent silhouette that anyone who served in the Clone Wars would recognize instantly. Forward-mounted weapons already tracking the newcomers. The convoy captain doesn't recognize the silhouette at first. It's been years since anyone saw these ships in active service. Clone Wars footage, newsreels from another era, a war that's supposed to be over. Then the lead vessel opens a communication channel. The voice on the other end is the flat, synthetic tone of a B-1 battle droid. Attention unidentified vessels. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Compliance will ensure your survival. Resistance will result in your destruction. Roger, roger. The ion cannons fire first. Blue lightning arcing across the void between ships. Shields fail. Engines die. Communication systems go dark before anyone can transmit a distress signal. The convoy drifts, helpless, while boarding craft launch from the Munificents' hangar bays. 100 B-1 battle droids in scavenged armor cross the distance. Blasters modified with different targeting parameters than their original military programming. They're not fighting clone troopers anymore. They're securing cargo holds and neutralizing skeleton crews and stripping anything valuable from vessels that will never report what happened to them. The convoy's crew gets left alive. That's important. Dead crews can't spread stories. Live crews can return to port and tell everyone what they saw. 3 Munificent-class frigates operating in formation. Droid crews that don't negotiate and don't take prisoners and don't care about Imperial authority. Word spreads. Shipping routes adjust. Convoy captains start paying for escort services that can't actually protect them against former military hardware. Insurance rates climb. And somewhere in the lawless void between Imperial authority and the systems nobody remembers exist, a pirate fleet operates with impunity. Picture what that fleet looked like at its height. A handful of Munificents, 3, maybe 5, operating out of an asteroid base in some uncharted system the Republic never bothered mapping and the Empire hasn't gotten around to surveying. The organic crew numbers may be 50, former Separatist officers who refused to surrender, criminals who saw opportunity in the chaos, technical specialists who knew how to keep droid systems running and hyperdrive motivators functioning. The droid complement runs into the hundreds. B. 1 battle droids handling ship operations, their programming modified to accept orders from new masters. Maybe a few B-2 super battle droids for heavy security. Perhaps a tactical droid coordinating fleet movements. Those units were smart enough to recognize when the war was lost and survival meant adaptation. They prey on the shipping lanes between former Separatist worlds, routes the Empire hasn't bothered to patrol because there's nothing valuable enough to protect. Mining shipments, agricultural cargo, the occasional corporate transport carrying executives who thought the Outer Rim was safe enough for travel. The victims who survive spread the word. Ghost ships from the Clone Wars. Droid crews speaking that distinctive battle droid cadence. Munificent silhouettes appearing from nowhere and disappearing into hyperspace before anyone can respond. Imperial intelligence dismisses the reports at first. War hysteria. Traumatized spacers seeing phantoms. The Separatist fleet was neutralized. Everyone knows that. But the reports keep coming. This isn't just speculation for its own sake. This is what logically should have happened, given everything we know. Tens of thousands of Munificents existed. The Empire couldn't have found and destroyed all of them. The galaxy is too big, the war scattered these ships too widely, and the Empire's priority was establishing control over populated systems, not hunting down every abandoned frigate in uncharted space. Some percentage survived through nothing more than geographic luck. The crew requirements made operation viable for small groups. 200 is the minimum. With droid automation, a handful of organics could manage. Pirates throughout history have operated vessels far more complex, with far fewer trained personnel. Reprogrammed battle droids existed in post-war canon. The technology for overriding droid shutdown protocols wasn't classified Imperial secrets. It was basic engineering that any competent slicer could manage with the right access. We know droids were recovered and reprogrammed because canon shows us examples. The weapons worked perfectly for piracy. Disable rather than destroy. Take prizes rather than make wreckage. Deter pursuit rather than fight running battles. Everything about the Munificent's armament configuration suits the pirate mission better than standard military engagement. And the Outer Rim was lawless enough, for long enough, that pirate operations had time to establish themselves before Imperial authority could respond. So where are they now? That's the question canon won't answer. And I think that's because the answer creates problems. If Munificent-class frigates survived in significant numbers, then the Empire's early consolidation of power looks less absolute. Stories set in the Rebels era would need to acknowledge that serious military hardware was floating around the Outer Rim in criminal hands. Characters would reasonably ask why the Empire tolerated pirate fleets operating vessels that could threaten actual Imperial installations. The narrative of Imperial dominance requires the Separatist military to have simply stopped existing. Droids deactivated, fleets scrapped, threat eliminated, clean transition from war to order. It's easier, narratively, for the Munificent to simply not exist after 19 BBY. It's cleaner if all those tens of thousands of frigates just went away, stopped mattering, got written out of the story because their presence would complicate the simple narrative of Imperial power. But we know better. We watched the Clone Wars. We saw how many of these ships existed, how they were everywhere, how they formed the backbone of Separatist naval operations from the first battle to the last. We know they didn't all get destroyed at Coruscant because the Separatists were still fielding Munificents at Mandalore afterward. They went somewhere. Logic demands it. Maybe a decade later, maybe two, the Empire tracked them down. Star Destroyer task forces finally made the journey to the Outer Rim's farthest reaches, hunting the ghost fleets that had operated with impunity during the Empire's early years. Or the ships broke down from lack of proper maintenance, droid crews unable to perform the repairs that required specialized facilities and replacement parts that weren't being manufactured anymore. Or the pirates got greedy and hit the wrong target, finally drawing enough Imperial attention that a response became unavoidable. The Munificent fleets scattered, sank into legend, became ghost stories that Outer Rim spacers told each other in cantinas on stations that Imperial authority never visited. You hear about the skeleton ships? The ones with the droid crews? They say if your hyperdrive drops you in the wrong system, they're still out there, waiting. Canon doesn't give us this ending. Canon doesn't give us this story at all. But the facts are there. The logic is there. The only thing missing is official acknowledgement. The Munificent-class star frigate was too capable and too numerous to simply evaporate from the galaxy. Its absence from post-Clone Wars canon is either a storytelling oversight, writers who forgot how many of these things existed, or a deliberate choice not to address questions that would complicate the narrative of Imperial dominance. Either way, it's a mystery worth investigating. I've given you the investigation. I've shown you the documented presence during the Clone Wars, the logical survival paths after the war ended, the unanswered questions that canon refuses to address. And I've given you the pirate fleet. Maybe someday Lucasfilm will tell us what happened to tens of thousands of pocket cruisers that vanished from galactic history. Maybe they'll confirm the piracy theory or reveal something stranger. Until then, this is the story. A ship that deserved better treatment from the narrative, a disappearance that doesn't make sense when you apply logic to the facts, and a speculation that fills the gap official sources refuse to fill. You were right to love this ship. You were right to notice its absence. You were right to ask what happened to it. Now you have an answer. Subscribe for more stories like this.